Hello, hello, hello. Okay, so I'm just checking out everybody who's here. We are recording, we are live. Awesome. Okay. So for those of you who came here from YouTube, I just want to let you know, in case you didn't hear, I have finally decided to put out a tarot class. So fully going into teaching. And this is something that, yes, I will be posting the replay on YouTube. So don't worry about frantically taking notes or anything like that. You're welcome to just chill, relax, receive this information, and we're just going to have fun. And so since I am teaching Tarot Reading Rebel is the name of the course, I'll talk about that more later, but I figured I should at least guide you in selecting a tarot deck, no matter what level you're at. So that's what we are going to go into today. And let me bring up the chat box for those of you who are on here. If you have any comments or questions or anything that I can address, just drop it in the chat box and I'll answer your question. Or if you want to know, oh, should I use this deck or that deck, or what about this, what about that? I'll open it up for questions as we go. And then, okay. So the first thing, whenever you are selecting a tarot deck, there will be things that become easier and easier to read with as your experience grows. So at this stage in the game, and keep in mind, I've done thousands of readings, literally thousands of readings. So for me, you can hand me a deck of playing cards and I can read with that. You can hand me some dice and I can read with that. You can hand me just about anything, bones, charms, and I talked about this in the divination course, or the divination masterclass, where I can read with just about anything, but that's because of my intuition. My intuition and my clairvoyance has really grown over time, and that tool, that skill has sharpened. But in the very, very beginning of your tarot reading experience, there are some key things that I have realized do really well for beginners and people who are just diving into it and developing their intuition in the beginning. For the sake of this conversation, I'm not going to be discussing oracle decks because in reality, there's no consistency with oracle decks. So if you're getting something like that, just go off of whatever you like because they're all going to be different and there's no formula. So you just want to shop around if that's the route that you're taking. But when it comes to tarot, there are really, really clear, distinct things that will help make it easier to read and will make it more difficult to read. So the deck that I recommend to pretty much every single beginner is the Morgan Greer tarot deck. So this is more vibrant than the OG Rider-Waite tarot. I don't even have a Rider-Waite tarot, but that is considered to be one of the original iterations of tarot. So Morgan Greer adheres to very consistent in terms of the traditional element of tarot, but it's a fun, enjoyable deck to work with, and it's very easy for beginners. And the reason why is because of the color. So even as I'm showing you all of these, you can tell it's really, really vibrant. There's a lot of different colors. And when you're developing this skill and using your intuition more, having color will communicate to your intuition. So for decks that have almost no color, or they're black and white, or I have another deck that is just black and pink, that is going to be much more difficult because there's less information that can trigger your intuition. So the point of a tarot deck is that this is going to trigger intuitive information based on the imagery, the symbolism, the color, all of what's happening on the card. For people who are very rigid in their thinking about tarot and who put intuition in the back seat and have tradition in the front seat, in the driver's seat, they're going to have a completely different opinion on this than me. So I do not teach people tarot by memorizing definitions. I will never, ever, ever teach someone to do that because it suffocates intuition. And instead, if we focus on context, on color, on what is popping out, then that's how the intuition is going to come to the forefront of the reading. So color is number one. We want to make sure in the beginning you're working with a color deck because it's going to be easier. The other thing is I recommend working with a deck that has humans on it, so people who have faces and expression, or humanoids. So a good example of this is Paulina Cassidy. And this, let me show you. This card, for example, is kind of like an animal humanoid, but these are excellent beginner decks, Paulina Cassidy, because lots of color, lots of context, and they're human-like. So you can see the expression on this card. And what we're looking for when you're picking a tarot deck is make sure that you have expression, because the expression is going to communicate to your intuition when you start reading. And so some animal decks, if you're looking into getting a deck that has animals on it, it can be hit or miss, in all honesty. Some animal decks are easy to read and some are way more challenging. But humanoids really, really work. So that's a good thing to keep in mind as well. I do recommend in the beginning selecting decks that adhere to traditional imagery, but you don't necessarily have to get a Rider-Waite or Morgan Greer. So having something that can teach you the skeleton of tarot in the beginning will be really, really helpful. And what I mean by that is something that adheres to, it has a major arcana. So this would be the first 22 cards in the deck, I believe it is 22. Having that followed by the minor arcana, and that is what you know as suits. So you have coins, coins, wands, cups, and swords. So something that at least has the same skeleton is going to be the easiest, because then if you at least know the traditional skeleton of tarot, if you select a deck that is funkier, that has like this deck, the Tarot of Plants, this isn't a good beginner deck, but it goes off of seasons. So the seasons, you know, fall, spring, summer, and winter, are representative of the suits in tarot. And if you know the skeleton of tarot, when you get presented with a deck that offshoots into something else, it will be easy to transition into one of those decks. But in the beginning, familiarizing yourself with tradition is a good way to start and just get comfortable and cozy with it. Because what tarot in large part is about is building confidence, building trust, building intuition. So if you're layering on too many complex, out of whack, like artistic interpretations of tarot, sometimes you can get lost in the weeds a little bit. Even I can do that. So definitely stay away from things that carry you too far away from tradition. And not only suits, but the court cards. So if you don't know what a court card is, it's the page, knight, queen, and king. So sometimes they'll play with them like prince, princess, or I have a deck that even goes into, like there's a philosopher one, I think that's the king, but they call it a philosopher instead. There are others that have more familiar or familial suits or court cards, excuse me. So mother, father, son, and daughter. That can be a way that it branches out, and different tarot decks have all sorts of interpretations. That, if you're layering on too much of that, can interrupt your intuition in the beginning. It gets easier once you're familiar with tradition, but in the beginning, it can be somewhat of a distraction. So that is why I recommend keeping it as close to tradition as possible in the beginning. And then as you get more confident, you can start experimenting with other more creative stylistic decks, if that makes sense. Context. Okay, this is a really important piece as well in the beginning. When you have a deck, let me open this up and show you what I'm talking about. So this deck, I love it, the Tarot of Plants, okay? But something like this, a mushroom, just out of context mushroom. In the early stages of reading, this is going to make it more difficult because of the lack of context. So there's not as much that can speak to your intuition, whereas a deck like this, let me find a good card. Ooh, this is a good one. This card is full of context. You have the color, you have the swords, you have the hands that are bound together, you have the trees, you have so much going on in this card that your intuition will organically find things that it resonates with, and the message will come through clearly based on context a lot of the time. Whereas at this point in the game, of course, reading with a deck like this is easy for me, but that's only because of practice. That's because of time and experience. And so in the beginning, shopping for a deck that has context will make this so much easier. A couple of decks that I know are really popular, but that I don't recommend for beginners are decks like the Wild Unknown. Don't get me wrong. It's beautiful. So many people love that deck. I have all the Wild Unknown decks. Absolutely no shade, right? And in the same breath, that deck lacks context and color in many of the cards, which is, it's a stylistic choice, but I know a lot of beginners who struggle with that deck. Some people do fine with it, but I'm just letting you know, even if it's a popular deck, sometimes it can be a little bit trickier to learn with. The other deck, I wish I had these on me, but they're in storage right now, so I have just a select few decks that are with me at the moment, is the Lion Strider Tarot deck. The Lion Strider Tarot deck is, it's beautiful. It's gorgeous. I love that deck as well. It just has a lot of white space. It doesn't have a lot of context. And if you're not really in tune with the voice of the tarot deck, then you can kind of get lost. There's not as much context to jump out and communicate to you. So, beautiful deck. But decks like the Wild Unknown or the Lion Strider Tarot, I would say make those the second deck that you practice with. I wouldn't lead with that. I will leave the decks that I recommend for beginners in the description box. I'm going to post this on YouTube. So Paulina, Cassidy, excellent beginner decks. Almost, I don't want to say all of her decks, But the Paulina Tarot, this one is super good for beginners, and the this one, Joie de Vivre or something like that, is another good one. So Paulina Cassidy, Morgan Greer is excellent, or other traditional style decks as well. I'm checking my notes. Is there anything else? Okay. So then there are other decks like this, the one that I'm pulling out right now. And this is the Cosma Visions deck, but this is actually a tarot and oracle hybrid. So the interesting thing about this deck is that it's very unique. It's beautiful. There's tons of color. There's tons of context. There's so much going on in this deck. And under normal circumstances, I would say, you know, that this is a good one, except the court cards are completely different. The major arcana is completely different. So there's no reference point unless you have the numbers of the major arcana memorized, essentially. So just beware. Beware, I would look, or this, even this card, this is a bonus card. This doesn't correspond to any of the major arcana cards at all. It is just an extra card that the artist threw in. And this is actually something that is, I don't want to say common, but it's not difficult to find. It's a popular addition that people can make to their tarot deck. And so sometimes you'll see that as well. The artist will throw in a bonus card that doesn't adhere to anything in traditional tarot. So that is the basis of the decks that I suggest, or the key points in when you're shopping for a tarot deck. I recommend that you look at these elements. So again, using humans, make sure they have faces or expressions, or they're humanoids in some type of context, right? So you want cards with context, like the Morgan Greer, right? There's a lot going on. There's a lot for your intuition to communicate with. Color, make sure that you're not getting a black and white deck. And just so you can get a general understanding of it, what the difference is, there's just not as much that can come through in a black and white deck. Eventually there is. Like eventually this card would read really easy, or this card would read really easy. But again, I would say a deck like this, make this second in your collection. Put this as a secondary deck where it's like, ooh, once I familiarize myself with the traditional flow and style of tarot and context of tarot, this would be a cool second deck to get. At least that's what I recommend to people. If there's, keep a super traditional deck on hand, or something that is really crisp and clear with tradition, and then have a fun one that inspires you and that has really pretty artwork that you love looking at, you know. So have both if you would like, or start with the basic traditional skeleton of tarot. Color, context, humans, traditional suits. Yes. Okay. Are there any questions at this point in time? I'll give you a moment. Or any questions about learning tarot? is a Crowley for beginners? Let me check 1 second. Yeah, I just looked that one up. That one you can, but the thing that I would look out for is there's a lot of abstraction in this deck. And again, there's somewhat of human form, but there's a lot of abstract shapes. And I'm not sure if the suits are going to be consistent. So it could be, if you're really drawn to the style, it can. But there are a few nitpicky things where I would say, I don't love that for beginners, just because it can be a little bit foggy. The only way that a beginner is going to do well with this deck is if they absolutely love it, they're drawn to it, and they see expression in this deck. So if you're absolutely in love with it, you can pull it off. It just wouldn't be my first choice. The same way, Wild Unknown, I don't recommend that for a first deck, but you can pull off learning with it. What are your thoughts on decks that are overly sweet or positive? I find them too weak. I completely agree with you. The soft and fluffy decks, because it doesn't really provide enough contrast for me. I like having contrast in the reading, because something like this can jump out and it's like, so I personally wouldn't want to be in this energy. And that can be really helpful when you're reading. So something like the Good Tarot, I think it's called. I actually sold that deck last year because I didn't want it in my collection anymore. And that's one where if you're extremely sensitive to, for this discussion, let's just call it negative energy. If you're really, really sensitive to negative imagery or something that's intense, then leaning towards something that's really light and angelic and airy-fairy might work well for you if that's how your intuition works. I like more contrast, though. I want to see more potent images, or more pain, more shadow, a little bit more flavor in this, because it adds for more variety. So what you're tapping into is the contrast piece. If everything is positive, if there's no contrast, then that's where you're getting the weak reading from, right? So it's just a different style, but it all depends on your intuition as well. So this reminds me of when people are learning how to do clairvoyant readings, let's say, every person might be learning the same tool, but how their intuition, how their clairvoyance shows up in terms of imagery is going to be completely different. So for my intuition, it's very, very bright and colorful. So I get lime green, I get bubblegum pink, I get royal purple when I'm doing clairvoyant readings. And I have a friend who only sees clairvoyantly in jewel tones, because that's her style. That's the colors that are most resonant with her. And tarot and clairvoyant readings have a lot of similarity. And I'm going into this in Tarot Reading Rebel when we get to the linguistics portion, because it's how you would ask in a clairvoyant reading and how you would ask in a tarot reading a lot of the time mimic each other. So there's a lot of fun stuff to play with. I'm trying to think, is there anything else about choosing a tarot deck that is really, really key for you? The only other thing that I want to mention as far as selecting a tarot deck that is good for you is like it. Make sure that you really, really love it. Even if it is one, like let's say you're like, okay, Sydney, I'm going to listen to you. I'm going to go get a traditional, something that has more traditional skeleton and style to tarot, or the OG tarot. Then make sure if you're going to get one that you like reading with it. Because if you buy a deck that you're just not, that doesn't seem fun, you're more than likely not going to enjoy reading with it. So I obviously, I'm sure you know, I have a massive, massive collection of tarot decks. And obviously I have ones that are my favorite and ones that sit on the shelf and collect dust because they're not as fun. They're not as, they don't pull me in. I don't have a good time reading with them as much as my favorites because I don't like the imagery as much. So just make sure that when you're shopping and when you're picking one out, that you genuinely like it. If it has images where you're like, ooh, I really want to read with that because the cards that could come up are just so wonderful to look at, that it's going to make the reading more enjoyable. And the more you enjoy the deck itself, the easier your intuition is going to pick up on information. So that's the other thing. If, like, for example, with the deck that's overly sweet or overly positive and has minimal contrast, if that's not your style and you're reading with a deck like that, the reading is also going to be more flat when you're delivering messages to other people or when you're interpreting messages for yourself. So those are my thoughts on all of that. Now, let's see. We can go into Tarot Reading Rebel because I'm sure a lot of you are interested in actually learning tarot. So for the week of June from the 4th to the 11th is when the class is going to be taking place. And I have 5 modules because the thing is, right now, people who teach tarot typically stick to tradition. And that's it. Like, memorize what these cards mean, memorize these suits, and just if you get stuck, it turns into this. When you memorize card definitions and nothing else, or you're going straight off of the guidebook, for example, when you do select a tarot deck, you're going to shuffle and shuffle. You're going to tune into your question, and then you're going to look at the card and you're going to say, well, what do cups mean again? Let me get out the book. I don't know how this applies to my question. It will make your intuition get locked up because there's no flow. If you're overly focused on what the guidebook says, for example, you're going to have this robotic style of reading. And so every time I get asked about learning to read tarot, I tell people, ditch the guidebook for now. Like, just set it off to the side for now, because it will muddy your intuition, because you're going to come from what the artist, for example, the artist who created the deck and who wrote the guidebook is going to have an overriding force on your intuition in the beginning. So early in your intuitive development with this particular medium, it's really important to lead with intuition rather than a guidebook or rather than tradition. And again, this is my style. This is why the class is called Tarot Reading Rebel, because there's probably a lot of people that I would piss off by telling you, ditch the guidebook for now, ditch Googling definitions, because then when you start reading, you're going to go up into your mind and your brain is going to say, oh, what does that mean again? wait, I'm doing a relationship reading and the Four of Coins is supposed to be about money and losing money, and it's going to take you far and away from your intuition, and the reading is just you're gonna lose your magic and all of that. You're gonna lose your true intuitive tarot interpretation. And on top of that, the storytelling component of tarot comes through authentic intuition. It comes from your unique style, your unique voice, your unique relationship to every deck that you use, no matter what it is, whether it be oracle or playing cards or tarot or whatever. And so this is why really what we're doing for, the 5 modules is getting into you developing this craft, you developing your intuitive voice, you developing the language and the way that you phrase questions. So we're really getting into the depths of tarot, not just looking at what does the Four of Coins mean. So intuition is where we start in all of this, bringing that to the forefront, making that the foundation of any divination tool that you use, okay? And then we go a bit deeper into symbolism and how symbolism is connecting with your intuition, how it's communicating to you, and how it's going to vary deck to deck to deck. Ooh, like in this deck, for example, you see one thing that the artist did in this deck was adding like Venus, okay, or the like the element right here in these little triangles, and I'm sure you've seen those before. Like this is air, I believe, in Jupiter, if I remember correctly. So by using different symbolism, that can communicate to you as well, and how to use that in a way that's constructive. Actually, I'm now thinking, I don't remember what the triangles for the elements are. And the point is, I'm glad that this came up, because the point is that not every piece of symbolism matters for your intuition. I don't work with the triangle things, with the lines. I don't do any of that. It's irrelevant to my intuition. But the astrological glyphs, that type of symbolism, oh, that really resonates with me. So that's what comes to the forefront in my intuition, my intuitive style. And so this is something where if you put pressure on memorization, it will completely steer you off track. And so a lot of this is going to be just loosening up, having fun with it, and letting the messages flow rather than trying to put yourself in a pressure cooker and trying to force something that just isn't necessary. Let's see. Do you find a deck that is just too physically difficult to handle? Oh yeah, a deck that's too big for your hands. Yeah, so when you have something like that, I might reorient the way that I'm shuffling, or like if I have a round deck, I can't stand round decks because they're a pain to shuffle. But one thing that you could do is maybe fan them out. Shuffle the deck as best as you can, or maybe split the deck, cut the deck. You could fan it out and then select the cards from there. Because the thing is, shuffling, I don't think shuffling matters as much as people think it does, or people who are very stuffy and uptight about tarot. I am not stuffy and uptight about tarot. I'm very lax, if you can't tell. It's okay, whatever, do whatever. In a certain regard, that is actually going to deliver better results. We kind of want organized chaos with all of this. So if you come into that situation where you literally cannot handle the deck, then just find another way to select cards that feel more comfortable, like fanning them out or spreading them out or cutting the deck. and see what happens when you ask question, you hold the question and then pull a card that way. The other piece of reading tarot, and we're going to be going into this in module 3, is how to phrase questions. This is like the number one thing that people struggle with, is how do I ask this? How do I phrase this? What type of information am I actually going to pull from this question? Or asking a question and then forgetting the question you asked after you pull the card, and then misinterpreting all of the information because the question wasn't clear. Too general, too specific. So we're gonna clean all of this up and just make it way, way, way easier for you. And leaning into linguistics in a way where you're not over communicating. I know a lot of people who struggle with wanting to pull a card and then be able to deliver a novel of information, and they end up over speaking in a way where the message gets lost in the mess. And so instead, it's a matter of being able to know when to push on the gas, when to step on the brake, when to keep it concise. And this is an intuitive practice. This is a skill that you develop as you learn tarot, as you get more comfortable with it. So the linguistics piece, I would say, is one of the most crucial pieces in all of this, because it changes the information that you receive in terms of how you ask, what you're doing with clarifying cards. If you're doing spreads and you get lost in feeling forced to tell a story rather than trusting your intuition. So all of these things are going to layer, and the bedrock of all of this is intuition. Intuition first. The medium, and if you were here for the divination course, you know this, the medium is secondary to your intuition. So that's the cool thing about all of this, is that it translates depending on what medium you bust out. And we just happen to be playing with tarot. So the fourth thing, and this is where it gets really cool, is we're going to be talking about ethics and permission. So for example, if you've ever done a tarot reading and then you feel like you get shut out from the reading, or, oh no, why can't I read this? Or why is it foggy? Why is it hazy? Or why doesn't this make sense? And I'll break down and help you navigate the permission piece of it, or the ethical piece of it, and being able to communicate. So if you have clients or friends that you're reading for, we'll clean all of that up. And then you're going to be able to come with a lot more confidence and clarity and ease in all of this. And then the last piece, if you have been wanting to start a YouTube channel or read tarot as from a business standpoint, like get paid and compensated for readings, we go all into the business side of things so that it can be something where you grow a social media presence and how to read in that context. And then also just the business basics as well, if you do ever decide to make money with this. Right, because there's never a shortage of people wanting readings. I can tell you that right now. And you might know that my career started with doing $10 tarot readings. That's how this whole thing happened, right? And just doing readings for people on YouTube. So it's been a long journey, thousands of readings, and here I am. So that being said, I have a coupon code for you. Tarot Reading Rebel is normally $5.55, but I have a coupon code for you, Rebel, REBEL. If you want to get in, it saves you like $156. And that'll be up until June 3rd. So we start June 4th, and it goes through the 11th. And you'll receive clarity on the dates and times when I get all of that set up, or when I clarify on the sales page, but that's going to be when it's happening. And it's just going to be relaxed. We're going to have a good time. And oh, one other thing that I want to mention. And this, I'm going to mimic this from the Divination Masterclass. I'm going to tell you the clearing script, okay? So again, I will leave this in the description box as well, but this is excellent, excellent, excellent for those of you who read or just pull cards on the fly, whatever. I want to give this to you because I feel like everyone should at least know how to clear their deck. Okay, so this is what I do. And this clearing script came from an old mentor of mine had a student who came up with this script for a completely different tool. And I started using it with tarot, and it's been extremely effective. So I just put the deck between my hands, keep it really simple. I ask the archangels to keep the cards clear of shadow, including my own shadow, and to uphold the purest form of information. Don't worry about writing all of that down. I will leave it in the description box for you. But that clears it up. So any funkiness, or if you're in between readings, or if you feel like it just needs to be cleared, it's time. You just hold it, repeat that, and it clears it up. So that is one thing that if there's one piece of this that I just want everyone to have, is just how to clear their divination tool. That's really, really important for you to have. So that being said, I think that's a wrap. Unless you have any other questions, I'm here to answer. But I'm so excited to have people in Tarot Reading Rebel. It's going to be an absolute blast. We're going to go deep. It is by no means is it basic. Oh, and I'll put, if you have any questions, you can email me as well at hello@onyxhealing.com. I'll post all the links below in the coupon code if you want to hop in. Okay, well, let's go ahead and do a golden sun. So you're going to imagine a golden sun above your head. Call your life force energy back from anywhere you've left it. Reset at present time at permission to read intuition forward. And then crack it open like an egg, let it pour in through the crown. And that's a wrap. Thank you so much, everybody. It's been fun. Bye.